we have some shortage of time, so what I will do is initially tell you my thought process as to what I want to say, and then I will get into the detail of my presentation, which I'll try to restrict to 15 minutes. We don't live in a first best world. We actually live in a second best world all the time. And I say that because there's a very brief economic concept behind it. Of course, it's driven by maths, that you always try to maximize your constraints within the constraints. And so you can only maximize given the constraints. So it's never the first best. But maybe it is the best you can do under the circumstances. What I'm trying to drive is that in a second best world, there is always a need to move to the first best world. And that need is to be driven by technology. That's my belief. And that's why technology emerges. That's why people do various kinds of innovations. They make different types of inventions. That need drives the technology. We need to go to Mars. We need to capture the resources in Mars because the resources on the Earth are falling short. So we need to find a way to travel to Mars. We need to get into research on space. We need to get to all sorts of things which can help us to reach Mars. But once the technology is available, whether it is to be used by me only, whether it is to be used by a group of persons, whether it is to be used by a country, or whether it has to be used by the world, that allocation depends on 100 of other things. Of course, it depends on who can pay for it the best. Then the technology is available on a check. But what I am trying to say in my presentation is, I will tell you about how the coastline is endangered with a whole lot of issues. But what we need to do is to drive technology into those sectors where it is needed the most. In this particular case, in this particular session, the coastal hazards and the coastal issues with environment. What drives these resources to be driven, technology to be brought into mitigating all the adverse effects? That is what we call in economics the relative cost, relative pricing of goods and technology and anything else, but it is driven by policy. Now, policy has to be such that it drives technology into that. I'll tell you with a little presentation I have here for yourself. Before I proceed, this session being on the blue economy, let me see, yeah. Blue economy was originally a word introduced by the environmental scientists. It was supposed to be it was supposed to be exploiting the marine resources of the oceans using the best, most, or the least intrusive technology, not damaging the environment permanently, but yet developing a marine economy. That was the original concept which came in one of the big world conferences on environment. But the blue economy concept, I don't want to say at the risk of sounding immodest, I have extended it through a number of papers into what we call the blue economy of infrastructure. Why do we need to do everything on the earth? Why can't we do things into the sea? There is a shortage of place on coastal zones. There is a congestion. There is a issue of pollution. There is a whole lot of issues we'll come to. Why don't we move into the sea? Why can't we have a floating port? Why can't we have a floating island Why can't we have everything in the ocean? Why do we have to do it in Vizag? Why do we have to do it in Paradeep? Not everything needs to be done there. I will suggest a small solution which I have actually in my real life put into operation. That makes my presence here slightly more relevant as an administrator. I've done things which have taken technology to implementation levels. Having said that, and extended the concept of blue economy, I must tell you that the coastal zones of India, the coastline of India, which is 7,500 kilometers, which is one of the biggest coastlines in the world because India is like a peninsula. We have almost 7% of our population residing along the coast. There are 9 maritime states. There are 9 states out of all the 29 states in this country which are along the coastline of the country. We have the government this time, the present government, has floated one of the most ambitious projects, which is called the Sagarmala. I will talk more about it, but let me tell you what we are doing on the coastline. Sagarmala, by its name, means a bead of a mala, which is touching the sagar, touching the ocean. I'll tell you more about it as I go along. When we develop the coastline, which is being done under the Sagarmala project, there are ways that it will impact. There are things that will happen. There are policies that will be adversely reacting with some of the issues. But we also need to realize that there is one item in this entire world called population which has a monotonic growth. It just grows. And unless there is a world war or there's a nuclear war, we will never see the population come down. It will always grow. The rate of growth could be high, could be low, could be medium, but it will grow. As the population grows, we have to look for more and more resources to feed the population, more and more land to settle the population. Since we are all restricted by a coastline, everything has to happen within that coastline. That creates issues, that creates challenges for the technology, that creates challenges for the policymakers, and that creates issues for the scientists, that creates the issues for people to bring science and policy together and see what best can be done. There are 3 things when I say, as I develop the background, that instead of being contained by a peninsular coastline, we should perhaps think in terms of shifting more and more activity outside the coastline. We should think in terms of the blue economy, which we can work in the ocean. We should think in terms of reducing our logistics costs. We should think in terms of reducing our manufacturing costs, increasing our productivity, but how? By several measures. One of the things I'm going to suggest here, which is relevant, there are hundreds of other things we can do, is when traffic moves from within on the land to the sea, there are numbers which will show that it's good for the environment, but there are other issues which come as a reaction to it, and we need to handle that. As I said, the first positive, when they move, pollution levels could be down, but the negative of that movement would be construction traffic disturbs the flora fauna. You will have more ports, you will have more traffic, you will have bigger ships. Of course, it will disturb the fauna under the water and in the sea. But when you put in policy, when you put in technology, that's the only way. We'll come and see in 5 minutes how only way to do is to technology will drive and mitigate the negative effects. In fact, I have a model which I just said that we have actually created, a model which takes the load of the port and does shipping services into the sea. Before I lose on time, I must keep moving fast so that I can at least bring you to that very interesting subject of how innovation can help. We are all aware, we've read a lot of places, road and rail traffic creates a lot of issues. It is creating pollution. I mean, Delhi is a living example of a place where people like us live, but when we come here and when we go back, this evening when I'm back in Delhi, I will realize what Delhi does not have and what this place has. Immediately you see there's a pollution thing. All sorts of negatives on how when you move traffic, when you move cargo, when you move goods on road and rail, causes congestion, the delays in the cargo, loss of competitiveness of the Indian manufacturing, competition with passengers traffic, and basically what I'm trying to say that you need a modal shift. To where? You need a modal shift to work the blue economy. You need to move into the sea. You have a big coastline. You don't have to transport everything from Visakhapatnam to Mumbai by train or by a lorry or by a truck. You can actually do it along the coast. That's coastal traffic. Just for instance, I've given you a comparison that the carbon dioxide released per ton of fuel used in road for a similar lot of cargo is almost 1/4, I can say. It's 25% if you move it by the sea. And this is not my numbers. These are numbers from United Nations and other researchers. 1 minute on what is the policy, what is the act that determines the movement of coastal shipping? There is an act called the Merchant Shipping Act of 1958, and the entire coastal shipping is governed under that act. I've been a great votary of that act being split into two parts, because that act governs the big ships, which are, let's say, 60,000 metric tons or 600,000 metric tons, and they also govern the smaller coastal ships, which are in the range of about 25, 30,000 metric tons. There are different requirements for both ships, so the same act actually imposes a lot of compliance cost on the smaller ships, and that is one of my logics why coastal shipping in this country has not taken off. But we have now been able to bring a new Merchant Shipping Act, which is actually in the Parliament now, and which is now separating through a chapter how coastal shipping will be governed in the future in this country. Coastlines are very important for every nation. We must realize we live on a coast here, but we don't realize it's really an important thing. Why? Because you are at the end of your country. It's like a border. It is nothing less than the Siachen border. It is nothing less than the Thar Desert border. It is nothing less than the Chinese border in Tibet. You are on the border. Only difference is you don't have an enemy across. But it is a border. You have the coastal zone, you have the economic zone, and it is governed by a set of laws which are called cabotage laws. So this is just information. Cabotage laws are very strict in some countries and not so strict. In United States, the coastal traffic cannot be done by a non-US ship. Cannot be, that ship has to be a US flag ship. It has to be a ship actually made in the United States, even made in the United States. But they have different aspirations. They think that they are the policemen of the world, so they have a different requirement. In case of some war, they need ships, so they want a certain amount of ships which are under their control. In India, it's not absolute cabotage. A foreign ship can do some coastal cargo, but with permission. Now, that I think is not a great idea. It should be a binary issue. Either you have absolute cabotage or you don't have cabotage. This midway point where you have power to relax is what causes all sorts of issues, including ethical problems. But that said, we are working on it. I've been able to push the government to get a fair amount of relaxation, but it's not complete yet. So we'll see on the line that Japan, China, US are very strong. They don't allow anything on non-United States type ships on the coast. Coast means doing, a lot of people go, a lot of foreign ships go and dock into their ports. But if they have to take cargo from one coastal town to another coastal town, that's not allowed. You can go there, there are ports, it's like international port, you can go and land. But within the ports, like in India also, you will never see Emirates carrying passengers between Delhi and Bombay. It'll carry from Delhi, it'll carry from Mumbai, but it'll go all the way to Dubai. It's just one way. So that's the kind of absolute restriction US has, but we allow with some permissions. There are a whole lot of statistics. I think just to save time, I will not go through it. The presentation I've handed over to the organizers. But if you want to raise coastal traffic, which is the primary suggestion which has been made by me here, and the government has got a policy to shift from 2% of the total cargo which is being done on the coast to 10%. Of the different modes, 10% should be the share of coastal cargo. Now that means coastal cargo has to grow in some large manner. That will create issues, and we'll come to that. I will not get into the issues of logistics. Had we gone through a long lecture, then I could have gone through, but logistics costs matter, everybody knows. And India, of course, you'll see on this chart that India and Asia, the logistics costs are very high. Consequently, we have loss of competitiveness, loss of productivity, loss of exports, and we need to improve our logistics costs. What I'm trying to say here, again linking it, you must be wondering, how is this relevant to coastal? If you were to shift to the coastal traffic, as the government is planning, the costs of transportation will go down. It's another thing that even pollution goes down. But it's a third thing that if you do that, there are some issues which come up on the pollution front, which we need to do something about. But movement is to be done. Mitigation technology has to be brought in. Another big push is through the inland water transportation. Even the Krishna Godavari basin here is being worked, this government has declared, the central government has declared them as national waterways. Big time planning is happening. As an interesting side story, I can say that there is a big canal which moves from Kalapakkam in the south all the way up to Kakinada and up, and it's called it's called Buckingham Canal. I don't know if you've heard about it. Buckingham Canal is an inland waterway which was dug by the British. It was dug by the British during several famines to provide employment and livelihood to people. As a process, the whole thing got dug. There was a canal. I have a lot of friends who've done actually sailed on these canals, these waterways. Even Kakinada, even today in Kakinada, you see that goods are sort of transported by this thing. But over the years, in the last 60 plus years of independence and maybe before that, probably following the colonial legacy, there was a lot of emphasis on roads and rail. Roads, especially after the independence. So they'll see a whole lot of roads which have been constructed, a lot of rails routes have been constructed, but these inland waterways have died. People have encroached upon them, they've filled it up, they've silted, and so on and so on. But they remain one of the most economically time? Okay. Okay, now let me just move on. What I'm saying here is that are we prepared to move to the coastal, outside the coastal belt? The answer is, even if we are not, we need technology to do it, right? And I am actually quoting, and it's a very beautiful report, it's available on the internet. If anybody was to Lloyd's register, is a 250-year-old British company which does a whole lot of research. You know, they are big in everything in shipping. They have brought a report, a perspective plan up to 2030. And you must read, as scientists, as people who drive technology, you must read why and what kind of technology is likely to develop in future which will mitigate the impact of our moving out into the coastal belt, into the coastal seas, the impact on, the negative impact on. There are three things I've just marked in red. The regulatory framework, which is absolutely very important. Technical, you can have techniques, but it has to be standardized. One of the biggest technical standardizations, I'll tell you, just to cite an example, was the containers. You will see containers are either 20 feet containers or 40 feet containers. Everywhere in the world, that's the way. Nowhere you'll find odd container, big or small, or like every container is either a 20 feet or a 40 feet. Technology has to be standardized to make it cheap. And that's what I mean. Again, I would say that technology is one of the things that is developing is the growth of LNG in the ships. The heavy fuel oil which the ships use is pretty environmentally dangerous, but not as much as a diesel on the road. It is. I mean, I'm not saying there is no NOx or CO2 being emitted by the seas. It is, but it's relatively less. Tomorrow we go to a non-carbon fuel like hydrogen. That's where the technology will bring. But who will use this who will use the hydrogen thing? I think that's where the policy comes in. The policy has to give incentives. The policy has to give a relative pricing such that people shift to a non-carbon fuel. I wouldn't do it even if today hydrogen is available, LNG is available. I will not take my ship into LNG or hydrogen because it costs me too much money, and it doesn't make too much of a difference in what I earn. So why should I go to? I don't care about technology, but tomorrow if the policy is such that if I was to move to hydrogen-driven ship, I would be rewarded through cheaper freight rates, cheaper port rates, cheaper, or something else will happen. How this happens in practical sense is the Euro 6 norm. In Germany, they wanted to drive traffic from the earth to the sea, and they gradually raise these norms. As you raise the norms, the cost of implementation, a Euro 6 car is much more expensive, but you have to buy a Euro 6 to drive in Germany. So people say, okay, we will not buy cars, we'll go buy a ship. Now that's how you shift. You change the relative pricing of goods, and that's the policy which drives people to adopt a technology. A technology may be available, but who is to buy it unless this kind of policy is. Well, I will, if you give me 1 minute, I'll show you a small innovation which has been done. All sorts of things are here. It's called the transloading. Transloading is a thing which happens in the sea. You get a big ship, you don't bring it to the port, you hold it somewhere about 200 kilometers into the sea. There you transfer into small boats or barges, and these barges go directly through the inland waterways to wherever they have to be taken. And it's not a theoretical construct. It has actually been implemented in our country. And I'll just show you a small clip, if it works. I don't think it works. I think you didn't copy it. Anyways, these are the kinds of transloaders you have.
In the slide mode and
Have you loaded the audio file
It's all built into that.
into it? Sound is okay.
It has to start moving. Anyways,
I'm sorry, it's not working.
that's no problem. In any case, I have run out of my time. But I'll tell you that this is you can actually check it up on the net. There are several references to the NTPC Farakka project, which actually has been launched. Indonesian coal comes into the Bay of Bengal at a place called Sands Heads, which is in the sea. Transloading takes place, and this is very new. This is about 2 years old. It's not an old project. And the coal, imported coal, is transloaded into barges, which are something like 6,000 tons. A big ship is about 200,000 tons into 6, and these take 500 kilometers into Farakka in West Bengal at the thermal power station of NTPC. It's actually happening. And if we do an evaluation, I think it must have cut a whole lot of pollution issues. Otherwise, this coal would have brought to Paradeep by a road or rail into the north, and then over the Chicken's Neck all around Bangladesh back into Farakka. That's what was happening. So this is why I say technology, innovation, and policy, they have to coexist, and they will drive our country to all its potential greatness. Thank you so much.